So I just finished watching Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, having only seen the 2003 adaptation before this point, and I can't stress enough how much I enjoyed the experience. FMA is something really special to a lot of people, and understandably so. While it can be classified as just another shonen, there are so many factors within FMA's story that set it apart from typical shonen battle manga. For some, it's the story. Others adore the action and the exciting uses of alchemy, but more often than not, it's the world as a whole. This series excels at world building, working to establish the greatest sense of realism within a fantasy setting that I've seen in a long time. Realistic fantasy is a bit of an oxymoron, but it's something that Hiromu Arakawa, the series creator, managed to achieve with FMA, and it's the main reason why I love this show so much. So, that just leaves the question, what makes FMA feel so real? World building is key in pretty much every fantastical series, whether it be a world somewhat similar to ours, like in My Hero Academia, or something completely different, like in Lord of the Rings. A writer needs to fill readers in on what kind of setting the story will be taking place in, otherwise there'll be a ton of concepts that go over their head, or entire facets of the universe that just end up being misconstrued. Fullmetal Alchemist is no stranger to world building, often giving the viewer entire history lessons on the universe it's set in, but these lessons always serve a purpose. From the vast geography of Amestris to its history of shaky foreign relations with neighboring nations like Drachma, every tidbit of knowledge works to further the narrative and provide motivation for characters that would, otherwise, seem completely directionless. The most notable example of this is the Ishvalan War. This conflict serves twofold as a major motivator for characters like Scar and Kimberly, having shaped them into the people they are during the events of the series, but it also helps to flesh out much of the history within Amestris. In episode 1 of Brotherhood, the conflict in Ishval is mentioned offhand, and it is constantly returned to throughout the first half to 3/4 of the show, but through a variety of different perspectives. The state military view this civil war as an overwhelming victory, and a necessity given the uprising surrounding it, whereas Ishvalans like Scar hold a deep hatred and resentment towards Amestrians, as well as state alchemists who were complicit or took part in this organized genocide. But what's even better, we get an in-depth look on how soldiers like Mustang, Kimberly, and Armstrong were deeply changed by their experiences within the war, how they've grown or broken down as a result. What could easily have been a one-off history lesson about the lore of this world was used again and again as a major motivator for so many key characters within the series. Because something as cataclysmic as a civil war would likely create ripples that would continue to echo out and affect the nation for decades. Ishval is just one of many major events that helps build the realism of FMA's world. From the moment we are introduced to the map in episode 1, we are given a crucial resource that is continually used and built upon throughout the series as a whole. FMA's map is vast and expansive, and yet nearly every corner is explored and utilized to show the scale of the adventure the Elric set out on. It also puts into perspective the gravity of the major events within the show. Sure, Father steering Amestris towards genocide in an effort to bring God down to Earth is inherently bad. No one is going to argue against that. Sacrificing the people of an entire nation is pretty awful, but we are likely to feel even worse about the whole affair if we have some attachment to this country and the people within it. From Fort Briggs all the way down to Leor, we've seen these places, learned about the people who live there, and as a result, have grown more emotionally attached to the nation as a whole. This isn't to say, as viewers, we wouldn't care if Amestris was to suffer the cataclysm that Father set up, but understanding what's at stake in this world certainly helps to keep us invested. Knowing our main setting is certainly a good way to keep things fresh and interesting, But FMA does take this a step further by expanding the map in Part 2 of Brotherhood. Beyond the borders of Amestris, we have Drachma to the north, Xing to the east, Arago to the south, and Kreta to the west. While the Xingese people are by far the most notable players from another country, the conflict with Drachma during the third part of the series does add another layer to the world building. We're never explicitly given a full breakdown of every nation in the world of FMA, but at the very least, we're shown that there is more beyond Amestris. The clashing of Amestrian and Xingese culture adds an interesting layer to their interactions as well, from fashion to weapons to even their alchemy. Different aesthetics certainly make for interesting character designs, but having that be a serious point of discussion in universe is a detail that does well to flesh out the world. Of course, anyone can put together a really good map. What truly sets Fullmetal Alchemist apart from other major shonen is its use of characters. Allow me to break this down for a moment. In most series, the cast is divided into 3 major categories depending on their worth within the story. You'll have your main characters, followed by your supporting characters, and finally, the background characters. If you're in the main cast, you'll likely be spending a lot of your time in the spotlight, being introduced early on, and being a main contributor to the story as a whole. Supporting characters do just what the name implies. They remain on the sidelines, aiding other characters within the series whenever the stars align. They're likely introduced a bit later on, and don't really play a very important role overall, maybe having 1 or 2 really good moments, then fading away into obscurity. Lastly, the background characters are exactly what they sound like. Characters who exist solely to stand around in the back, looking pretty, in an attempt to flesh out the world overall. If you're background, you're probably not going to say or do anything significant, but if you do, it's probably going to be a one-off line or gag. Fullmetal Alchemist certainly doesn't transcend this usual pattern, but it does have a tendency to blur the lines between these roles, and oftentimes it'll give its supporting cast a lot more time to shine. Ed and Al function as the true main characters of the series, protagonists who we as an audience will always end up coming back to, because this is a story about their adventure. The initial supporting cast is also fairly small, isolated to characters the Elric brothers have a direct connection with, such as Winry, and characters within the Amestrian state military, like Colonel Mustang, Lieutenant Hawkeye, and Major Armstrong. The supporting cast within any series is likely to vary throughout its runtime, often changing up the roster every season or so to keep things fresh. FMA does make changes to the supporting cast, but more often than not, it simply adds more characters to the roster overall. Stockpiling support characters has the potential to make a show feel overwhelming and chaotic, which is why most series tend to avoid doing it. This brings me to my main point, that Fullmetal Alchemist manages to build up an outstandingly large supporting cast, while still finding ways to balance them all within the show. Now, it's not like every single character in the series is on screen at the same time, all getting a word in every second or so. Rather, every support character's movement within the story feels much more natural. In essence, their actions and the roles they play feel less like they're predetermined by the story itself, and more like the decisions of real people. Take, for instance, the group of Chimera that are introduced in the third part of the series. Darius, Heinkel, Jerso, and Zampano are all human Chimera that join Kimberly on his trip up north to search for Scar and Dr. Marco, while also doing a few extra errands on the side. The Chimera are only there to act as bodyguards, and so it's natural when the Elric brothers finally meet up with Scar and company that our heroes would have some sort of fight against these quote-unquote jobbers. Predictably enough, the Chimera lose their respective fights against the brothers. But what happens after the fights is where things get interesting. After both the fight with Jerso and Zampano, as well as the fight with Darius and Heinkel, the Chimera find out the truth about the state of the government, and almost immediately they show a willingness to change sides. What's more, these Chimera actually join the team, and manage to stick with the group until the very end of the series. This is like if in Dragon Ball Z, after finally beating the Ginyu Force, the Z Fighters said, "Oh, by the way, Captain Ginyu is a huge dick, and Frieza is a horrible space dictator," and the rest of the Ginyu Force just kinda joined the team for the remainder of the show. Despite the changes made to their physiology, or their allegiance to Kimberly during the Northern Excursion, the four of them are still real people. They talk about their lives outside of work, like the families they have waiting for them back home, and there's just something about the depth of what could have been one-off minor villains that just feels so refreshing. There is another layer to the use of characters within the series, but it requires us to take a step back for a moment. Each individual is shown to be a crucial member of the narrative in one way or another, but there's also the matter of how they play into the world building. At the end of the day, you can only get so much across with maps and history lessons. The most efficient way to give a place more character is with the characters themselves. Take for instance the town of Lior. When the Elric brothers first visit, the townsfolk are warm and hospitable, as well as baffled by Ed and Al's alchemy. We don't know right off the bat that this is a religious town, but we can tell that these are the kind of people who have remained somewhat disconnected from the goings-on at Central, and, as a result, have grown somewhat ignorant to alchemy as a science. It's this lack of knowledge, as well as their faith to the sun god Leto, that made the people of Lior such an easy target for Father Cornello. But it's also their overwhelming kindness that leads them to band together and bounce back after the false priest's unmasking. At the complete opposite end of the map, we have Fort Briggs, in the cold, barren north of Amestris. All of the soldiers at Briggs show strength, resilience, and an undying loyalty to their commander that rivals any of the soldiers in Central. Below the initial layer of gruff, there is a warmth within the men and women stationed at Briggs, one that isn't shown all that often, but does come out when the time is right. Without getting too much backstory, we can tell a lot about Briggs from just the personalities and quirks of its characters. This fort operates like a machine to ensure the safety of Amestris from the Drachman forces. The strong, serious nature of these soldiers is almost out of necessity, which relays to the audience that Drachma is a force to be reckoned with. Their military acts as an ultimate spear, and so General Armstrong molded Fort Briggs into the ultimate shield it needed to be. Every soldier under Olivier Armstrong has an unwavering loyalty to her, which reflects a deep trust in her judgment and command. She hasn't steered the base wrong in the past, so even if the going gets tough, Fort Briggs is willing to follow her until the end. Every major location within Amestris has some character to it, and all of this adds up by the end of the series. Over the course of the series, our understanding of the world grows and grows as the Elric brothers move throughout Amestris, and we learn so much about the people and locations, enough that it makes this nation feel alive and real in a way that many other shonen fail to. I know, FMA isn't exactly a bold new story paving the way for shonen to come. It's been little over 7 years now since it finished being published, so it's not like any of this is news to anyone. Fullmetal Alchemist is good. I think that goes without saying, but I wanted to say it anyways, in my own special way. I can only hope that shonen of the future can learn from the mistakes as well as the triumphs of the past. There's a bright future ahead of us, so here's to hoping that there's some more good anime waiting for us there. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this analysis video. If you have any comments or any thoughts on the arguments I made, just leave a comment down below. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more analyses like these in the future, and I hope you have a good day.